Think of the coldest winter you can remember. Now, imagine that cold isn't outside your window, but packed into the walls of your stone bunker, high in the Italian Alps. It's 1917, and you're an Austrian Gebirgsjäger, a mountain trooper. Your enemy isn't just the Italians on the next peak. It's the altitude, the wind, and a cold so intense it can freeze the ink in your pen. In these positions, above the tree line, fuel is more precious than ammunition. A single plume of smoke from a cooking fire can draw artillery fire for miles. So, how did these men eat a hot meal? The answer lies not in a flame, but in a chemical reaction so clever and self-contained that it bordered on magic. This is the story of the pocket furnace, a survival stove that created heat from a secret powder and then vanished from memory. Now we've seen how trench soldiers on the Western Front used metal and draft. But the Mountain War presented a unique problem: ultra-low oxygen. At high altitudes, fires burn poorly and inefficiently. They splutter, smoke terribly, and waste precious fuel. What the Alpine troops needed was a heat source that was immune to thin air, wind, and wet conditions. A source that was completely self-contained. Enter a technology that seems more at home in a laboratory than a rucksack: the exothermic chemical heater. Historical records and rare surviving examples point to the use of small, cylindrical tins, not unlike a large tobacco can, that constituted a personal heating unit. Inside wasn't wood or coal, but a carefully measured dry chemical mixture. The most common and effective mixture described in Austrian and German Alpine manuals was a combination of iron powder, activated charcoal, salt, and sawdust. When a soldier added a small amount of water and sealed the unit, an incredible reaction began. This was oxidation, but accelerated and controlled. The iron powder would rapidly rust, combine with oxygen from the air and the moisture in an exothermic reaction. The charcoal and sawdust acted as a matrix to control the speed of the reaction, preventing it from becoming dangerously fast. The salt acted as a catalyst. The result was a can that would grow warm to the touch, then hot, and maintain a steady, flameless heat for up to 30 to 45 minutes. It produced no light and almost no smoke. You could literally hold it in your hands or place it in an insulated pouch to heat your rations. It was a heat battery. The tactical advantages were profound. A forward observer on a lonely ledge could heat his dinner without giving away his position. A machine gun crew in a snow cave could warm their hands and thaw frozen weapon mechanisms. Medical orderlies could use it to gently warm saline solutions for the wounded. Because it required no oxygen from the air to sustain its reaction, it worked just as well in a sealed dugout as it did in a howling gale. An account from a veteran of the Ortler front noted, "The Wormadose, the heat box, was more reliable than a lieutenant's promise. No flame to see, no smoke to smell, just warmth from a can. It felt like stealing fire from chemistry itself." But this wonder of portable heat came with significant, and ultimately fatal, drawbacks. First, it was a single-use device. Once the chemical reaction completed, you were left with a can of warm, rusty sludge. You couldn't refuel it. This made it logistically heavy. A soldier needed to carry multiple units for an extended patrol. Second, the chemical constituents had to be kept perfectly dry before use. A leak in a pack could ruin an entire batch. And third, on a macro scale, the raw materials became strategic. Iron powder and quality charcoal were needed for far more urgent war production. Explosives, steel, and filters for gas masks. As the war dragged on, diverting these materials to personal comfort items became harder to justify. So, the mountain troops' chemical heater existed in a narrow window of technological possibility and material availability. It was the right solution, made from the wrong stuff, at the worst possible time. Its story is one of brilliant adaptation immediately followed by unavoidable obsolescence. The brilliance of the chemical heater was, in many ways, its downfall. It was a hyper-specialized solution. It solved the extreme triple-threat problem of the high alpine front: altitude, visibility, and cold. But when you remove any one of those conditions, its advantages start to shrink. At lower altitudes, a simple fire or a solid fuel stove worked just as well, was reusable, and didn't require a chemistry set. After the war, the specific, horrific stalemate of the Alpine front, a war of glaciers and vertical cliffs, vanished from military thinking. The niche it filled simply ceased to exist. Furthermore, the science behind it was both its wonder and its curse. The reaction wasn't just heat, it was chemistry in progress. Once initiated, it couldn't be stopped. You couldn't turn down the heat to simmer something. You got one intense, decaying heat curve. This made it excellent for quickly heating water or a pre-cooked ration, but terrible for actual cooking. It was a water heater, not a stove. This limited its utility and appeal compared to a controllable flame. After the armistice in 1918, the knowledge of these devices didn't so much disappear as it diffused and transformed. The core principle, using a rapid, controlled oxidation reaction to generate safe, portable heat, was too good to lose entirely. In the 1920s and 30s, we see the emergence of the first commercial hand warmers, often using a similar catalytic reaction with platinum and lighter fuel. The military's single-use, squad-level heating unit evolved into a reusable personal comfort item for sportsmen and winter spectators. The final successor, and the nail in the coffin for any memory of the WWI original, was the development of the self-heating can for food and beverages. Patented in the late 1930s and used extensively in W2, this technology isolated the chemical reaction in a separate chamber within the can itself, applying the heat directly and safely to the contents. It was the logical endpoint of the concept, fully integrated, foolproof, and disposable. The soldier no longer needed to handle chemicals, he just pulled a tab on his ration. The ingenuity was now invisible, buried inside the can, and the user was completely detached from the process. The Gebirgsjäger tinkering with his powder was a forgotten grandfather to the GI opening his self-heating coffee tin on Iwo Jima. So the story of the WWI chemical heater is a classic tale of transitional technology. It was a stepping stone. It proved a concept under the most demanding conditions imaginable, that flameless, on-demand heat was possible. But it was crude, logistically clumsy, and too tied to a fleeting set of circumstances. It was the Model T of portable heat, revolutionary for its time, but quickly outpaced by more refined, reliable, and user-friendly models. Yet, its historical significance is profound. It represents a moment when soldiers and their quartermasters looked at the periodic table as a toolbox. They weren't just fighting with chemistry in the form of explosives and poison gas. They were using it to sustain life. In the silent, frozen observation posts high in the Dolomites, a simple can of oxidizing iron provided a sliver of comfort that was, in its own way, a defiance of the inhuman scale of the war. It was a small, warm protest against the elements. Its legacy isn't a physical object we can buy today. Its legacy is the principle it embedded, that heat can be carried in a dormant state, activated by need. That principle lives on in every modern hand warmer, every MRE heater, and in the very expectation that technology can provide comfort in isolation. The chemical heater was forgotten not because it failed, but because it succeeded just well enough to inspire something better, rendering its own quaint, rusty origins obsolete. What other niche technologies can you think of that were created for one specific extreme environment? Let us know in the comments.